Chapter 151. The palm seal failed to hit Li Hao, and Li Tiangang's angry expression suddenly froze. The sword seemed like countless petals fluttering before his eyes, actually causing a moment of confusion. Blossoms on the other shore, the sword intent actually affected him. Shock appeared in Li Tiangang's eyes, but after all, he possessed a divine soul at the peak of the three immortal realms. Though his realm had fallen, his state of mind was incredibly strong, and he quickly regained his composure with a metallic clink. A cold light suddenly lanced towards him, the shock in his eyes turned instantly into towering fury. Beast. With a roar, Li Tiangang's divine soul wielded a knife and swiftly plunged down in a slash, but Li Hao was closer, and his sword was faster. Li Tiangang just managed to dodge slightly, the sword's edge grazing his shoulder and creating a sound like clashing metal, leaving a bloody hole through his flesh. The three immortal realms consist of the unperishing, the indestructible, and the unwithering. Upon reaching the indestructible realm, one can render their flesh undying and impervious to blades with a single thought. It was only because Li Hao wielded a divine weapon that he could penetrate his body. Had it been a lower-grade weapon, it would have been impossible to injure Li Tiangang with this kind of strength. Warriors of the three immortal realms could roam unhindered in frontier battles, decapitating enemies amidst tens of thousands alone. If it were a Grandmaster of the Grandmaster realm, although formidable in single combat, once surrounded by an army, they could be shot to pieces in an instant, reduced to minced meat. Especially the armies trained by the Divine General Mansion, not even a Grandmaster could stand against them. With blood flowing from his shoulder, Li Tiangang's eyes bulged with shock and anger as he stared at Li Hao, but in a flash, he raised his hand and, before Li Hao could withdraw his sword, he seized the blade in a streak of lightning. In terms of killing experience, Li Tiangang was honed on mountains of corpses and seas of blood, his body nearly acting on instinct. At that moment, despite the risk of his palm being slashed, he fiercely smashed his fist towards Li Hao's chest. Li Hao swiftly let go of his sword, but instead of retreating, he clenched his sword hand into a fist and, with a roar, unleashed the half-step invincible fist. This punch broke the rules of half-step invincible fist. He instantly fused a sword intent, using his arm as a sword, and struck a harmonious blow of fist and sword. The domineering punch and sharp sword intent struck Li Tiangang's palm hard. His rough palm, fan-like, attempted to grasp Li Hao, but the sword intent within the fist penetrated deep into his bones, causing his arm to crack, and he couldn't help but stagger back. After the clash, both sides were shaken back. Heavenly human realm. Li Tiangang stared at Li Hao in shock, finally realizing that during that brief moment, Li Hao had kicked open the gates to heaven and stepped into the realm of a Grandmaster. His moves were no longer conventional, unrestrained, unpredictable. Li Hao's gaze was ice-cold, glancing at the sword in his hand. As a swordsman, losing one's sword was considered a disgrace. Had it been another swordsman, they might have chosen to tough it out and take Li Tiangang's palm strike, preferring severe injury over releasing their grip, but he had never had the consciousness of a swordsman since childhood. Sword or fist, whatever could attack, he would use that. Weapons are external. The self is core. Thinking this, Li Hao's consciousness became even more lucid and calm. Though he had just stepped into the Grandmaster realm and his state of mind had broken through, he had not yet established his own Grandmaster's path at this moment. However, he had already touched upon it. There were no rules in the world, no constraints. Because of people, rules existed, but what about this world? The sun, the moon, the stars, all things, rivers, flowers, grass, trees, they were each different, but they lived in harmony, complementing each other. The true merging is not about imposing rules. It's about fitting perfectly what one lacks, the other provides, not one-sided yearning. Perhaps that half-step elderly spoke of was just like this. To achieve one's own half-step is enough. Li Hao's eyes suddenly burst with a fierce light as a multitude of martial arts and cultivation techniques converged in his mind. The heavens, the earth, all things, every scene. Why should I be confined? There are countless rivers in the world, but in the end all streams return to the source. Li Hao had found his path, though it was just the first step, but at that moment he already knew which direction to take. A massive and formidable aura began to coalesce within him. Without a sword in hand, though he could still release sword chi, without the enhancement of a divine weapon, he couldn't reach his strongest killer move. Therefore, Li Hao chose the fist. His fist was also at the 6th stage, no less formidable than the sword. Looking into those eyes filled with shock and fury, Li Hao felt an urge to shatter them with his fists. He let out a roar to the sky, the ground cracking beneath him. A terrifying might causing the ground to sink all around him as he integrated numerous martial arts into his fist. He charged forward fiercely, his punches like mountains and rivers. The prototype of this punch was still the half-step invincible fist, but it only had a semblance of the original form. How audacious. Li Tiangang also snapped back to reality, his eyebrows seemingly ablaze with divine flames. I've repeatedly shown leniency, yet you persist in your folly. His body surged with a terrifying aura, the might of the three immortals erupting. At the same time, he suppressed his severe injuries, temporarily stimulating the power of the unwithering realm. His previously injured body showed signs of temporary recovery, his realm seeming to rise. This action would leave even greater damage afterwards, but the aura Li Hao released forced him to do this. He wanted to completely crush Li Hao's stubborn bones, even if he was a grandmaster. Tiangang, Li Qijing and others arrived on the scene, and seeing this couldn't help but howl in grief and anger. Li Tiangang fused numerous peerless techniques, comprehended their principles, and created his own top-notch palm technique, which at this moment burst forth like the vast and mighty sun. Endless golden light shone, casting the nearby streets into a dim shadow. Li Hao's eyes were bloodshot red, and the cultivation technique within his body rapidly revolved, unleashing the traits of the seven stars igniting, which doubled his power with its next cycle. Even though there were aftermath issues and he would be drained afterwards, at this moment he couldn't care less. Hot. Li Hao's hair stood on end with fury, his body erupted with dazzling true force, the fusion of law images, the enhancement of object-controlling divine power, everything converged into this one punch. He charged towards the glorious golden palm that carried a killing aura like a moth to a flame, reckless of the consequences. Then he was engulfed by divine light. With a booming sound, the heavens and earth seemed to shake, terrifying cracks appeared in the streets, and the violent force tore apart the surrounding buildings. Li Qijing quickly took action, transferring the people inside those buildings to prevent injuries. The golden divine palm suddenly burst and dispersed. The crowd looked on eagerly with such a momentum. Apart from Li Qizheng, Li Xuanli, and Li Fenghua, no one could intervene unless it was Lin Wujing, but at this moment he merely watched like a spectator, his eyes filled with astonishment, gazing intently at the scene. As the golden light of the divine palm shattered, Li Tiangang couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of fresh blood. His violent punch's residual force tore his clothes to shreds, revealing his strong and burly upper body. After all, his attire was not battle armor, and with the exception of his trousers, his upper body was exposed. Numerous scars covered his entire body, ghastly like earthworms. These were the countless injuries left from his battles at the frontiers. Even having reached the three immortal realms with an indestructible body, to accumulate so many injuries still showed how fierce the past 14 years of battle had been, and how many times he had fought. In contrast to his garments exploding, in another place, Li Hao's figure was flung backward like a cannonball. The punch that had gathered all his strength ultimately didn't reach Li Tiangang's vicinity before being dispersed, only stopping after hundreds of meters. Li Hao's body came to a halt, his eyes revealing shock. Although he had just entered the Grandmaster realm and hadn't had enough time to settle in, he had hastily condensed all his cultivation techniques, failing to reach the true peak. But that punch was already the strongest force he could muster at the moment. Yet he was still defeated. The difference in realms, coupled with the fact that Li Tiangang was an entity that surpassed top genius talents, made the gap too wide. Li Hao turned his head, only to see that terrifying figure enveloped in ferocious killing intent, stepping forward, as if a god emerging from fierce flames. The shadow of death loomed over him. Li Hao gritted his teeth, turned, and crawled towards the distance, then mustered an object-controlling force to flee far away. Come down to me! Li Tiangang roared furiously. His aura climbed, barely reaching the level of the middle stage of the three immortals with thunderous might. A crushing force struck down from above Li Hao's head, knocking him from the sky. His spine seeming to break, Li Hao crashed to the ground. Yet he did not give up, crawled out of the deep pit, and charged into the distance once more. But Li Tiangang's figure appeared abruptly, as if he had teleported, closing the distance and striking out with a palm. Li Hao was sent flying, his ribs shattered, breaking inch by inch, his internal organs damaged, and blood spurted from his mouth as if squeezed out, also gushing from all 7 apertures. His eyes and nose streamed with blood, a desolate and terrifying sight. To kill your brother, to murder your father, do you truly wish to become demonic? Li Tiangang's gaze was icy cold. Li Hao struggled to prop himself up, a thought telling him that he absolutely could not fall. He could not fall in front of this man. Seeing those defiant eyes, Li Tiangang's gaze turned furious. No matter how talented you are, what does it matter? Don't forget your last name, you're a Li. You are a member of the Li family. Every person you see from the Li family has given their life for the clan. What about you? What have you contributed? Everything you enjoy, every meal you eat, every grain of rice, every servant attending to your needs, they all belong to the Li family, all the result of everyone's life and death struggle for glory and wealth. It is the soldiers bleeding on the frontier, it's your first uncle, second uncle, third uncle, fourth uncle they paid with their lives. Li Tiangang advanced step by step toward Li Hao, his eyes flashing with a captivating glow. You feel wronged? Indeed, your father wasn't there for you. I've wronged you. But has your food, clothing, and shelter ever been lacking? Do you know how many boys there are whose parents died in battle the moment they were born? Should they feel wronged too? You say you ingested poison pills. Let's assume for the sake of argument that it's true, so what? You didn't die, you are still alive with such talent. Do you still need to care about that portion of divine blood? You could have asked me for justice, but you thought to kill their widows and orphans? Have you thought about your dead second uncle? His heroic spirit dissipated. Can he rest in peace? Finally, Li Tiangang stood before Li Hao, looking down from above at the young man covered in wounds. Tell me, what right do you have to be so recklessly unrestrained? Is it because you cultivated your power with the resources of the Li family? As Li Hao listened to the others' angry shouts, he tried to forcefully hold back the blood spurting continuously from his mouth, and the crushing pain of his shattered ribs and damaged internal organs from that one palm strike. But the more he tried to hold back, it seemed the more blood surged forth. He spat out the broken pieces of his organs from his mouth, looked up at the other, and his eyes revealed a smile mixed with fierce savagery. Why say so much? Why don't you just kill me? Then I won't be a Li anymore. When he heard the other say, let's assume for the sake of argument that it's true, so what? Li Hao no longer wished to waste another word with him. He didn't even bother to say that he had not enjoyed any cultivation resources apart from food and clothing. But why bother explaining? Explanations were pointless to the person before him. At that moment, even a strange sense of relief washed over him, including gratitude toward his second mother, who he had resented for over a decade, grateful that she ruined the divine blood within his body. He even felt a deep hatred and revulsion for the blood of the man before him that flowed through his veins. Chapter 152. Do you want to die? It will not be that easy, even if I cripple you. I must rid you of your stubbornness, lest you become possessed by demons in the future. I, Li Tiangang, would be ashamed before all the people of the world. Li Tiangang said with a cold gaze. He raised his hand, and suddenly, a surge of power swept out. The range of his immortal spiritual thoughts swept over the divine general mansion. And then, from a dark dungeon within the mansion, two chains shot out, racing swiftly towards their destination. These chains crossed the divine general mansion, over the heads of thousands, like two black meteors falling from the sky. Then they landed in front of Li Hao. I wanted to make up for you, but after so many years of being spoiled, even if it means breaking my word, I must first break your stubborn bones. Li Tiangang said coldly, don't forget what I do, for your obstinate nature. I have ways to erase it. Li Tiangang. Li Qingsheng's eyes bulged with rage as he charged over, his aged face flushing with anger. What are you doing? Do you really want to torture your own son? Fifth uncle. Li Tiangang's expression changed slightly. Then he retorted angrily, this is a family matter. Do not interfere. You're driving me to my grave. Li Qingzheng pointed at him and cursed furiously. You've just returned from the frontier pass. Weren't you imposing enough out there that you still need to throw your weight around here? For so many years, you haven't even glanced at Hao Er. You come back and demand he change this and that. Are you insane? Fifth uncle, enough. Li Tiangang's face turned to ice as he said, actually, I have already been patient before. These years you and second uncle have indulged this scourge, raising him to be so obstinate. You were meant to be my stand-in for raising him, and I didn't want to speak plainly. But Hao Er's behavior today, isn't it because you all have been indulging and protecting him? Can't you see what he has become today? He dares to lay hands on me. He just received the True Dragon nomination and got a bit of strength, and he is already so rampant. Once he achieves immortality and steps into the Four Stands realm, I fear even you uncles will be stepped on by him. He would even dare to shatter the ancestral divine position. You, Li Qingzheng pointed at him, shaking all over with fury, his eyes bulging, temporarily at a loss for words, blaming them for indulging Li Hao. Had they ever indulged Li Hao? In this vast mansion, besides the two of them, the old-timers, who else was there to accompany the child? And what wrong had the child ever committed? You are simply, utterly unreasonable. Li Qingzheng grinded his teeth and said, decades of state of mind were suddenly overcome with real anger, if it weren't for the need to guard the ancestral divine position in the ancestral hall. There Li family's Millennium Foundation, which was even more important than listening Rain Tower, would have taken action to severely discipline his nephew on behalf of his deceased brother. Make way. Li Tiangang's face was murderous, no longer wasting words with Li Qingzheng in his eyes. Everything the other said was an excuse for Li Hao, fifth elder. Please step aside. Don't break your oath over this mad dog. Li Hao's voice came from behind Li Qingzheng. Li Qingzheng's body shook slightly, his expression changing as he turned to look at Li Hao, covered in wounds, ragged clothes, and a face smeared with blood. His eyes were filled with pity and pain as he said, Hao, why don't you just yield and admit your mistake? After all, you are father and son, just apologize and that will be enough, father and son, after all. Li Hao laughed, laughing uproariously at the sky, but soon, the laughter stopped abruptly. Fifth elder, please move aside, Li Hao said again. Li Qingzheng's expression turned ugly, but in the end, he stepped aside, between father and son. There was no longer any barrier. The face full of authority, eyes dazzling and penetrating, was revealed in front of Li Hao. Li Tiangang said coldly, Fifth uncle is right, we are indeed father and son, although it's too late for you to admit your fault now, but if you do, today I will spare you from torture. Li Hao laughed once more, bitterly spitting a mouthful of blood to the ground. To hell with father and son, after all. Li Hao roared. It was because of that very thought, because of that millennia-old tradition of propriety, that the child within his heart still held hope for the couple at the frontier after 14 years. Yet those traditions of rites and music were the very reason he faced desperation today, battered and bloody. Upon hearing the young man's roar, everyone's expression subtly changed. Li Qingzheng froze, just about to speak out in dissuasion, yet a torrent of blood and rage surged across Li Tiangang's face as he furiously shouted, You're nothing but a beast. The chains on the ground suddenly flew out, their front ends revealing two sickle-like blades which now shot forward explosively. Li Hao roared in anger, trying to defend himself, but at this moment, the power of the yin and yang dual pulse was depleted, and the strength of the Seven Stars ignition had also gone silent. An unprecedented weakness filled his body, and as he barely raised his arm, it was quickly entwined by the chains, the twin sides pierced through fiercely, stabbing into his shoulder blades like nailing a convict to the cross. The violent momentum dragged Li Hao's body backwards in flight, only to be yanked back swiftly, falling at Li Tiangang's feet. I will make you admit your wrongs. Li Tiangang's eyes seethed with anger, his gaze commanding like divine fire as he spoke coldly, but the very next moment, a sudden roar thundered from the edge of heaven and earth. Li Tiangang. The angry bellow had not yet arrived when a fierce wind already descended like a blanket from the sky, sweeping in all directions and stirring up the dust and debris from the ruins. A figure appeared in a flash, landing between the father and son, and scooped up the young man from the ground, holding him in his embrace. However, the newcomer was none other than Li Muxiu. When he rushed back to Qingzhou City, he had hoped to catch the sensational ceremony of Li Hao inheriting the True Dragon, only to witness the scene upon his return. With his perceptive abilities, he could envelop an entire city. Looking at the young man in his arms whose internal breath was weak, at death's door, Li Muxiu's eyes nearly bled, his white hair rose without wind, his eyes filled with an anger that had been absent for a full decade. However, don't be afraid, Imback, no one else has your back, but your uncle is here for you. Feeling the warmth of those arms, Li Hao's tired heart seemed to relax slightly. Seeing his uncle's furious expression, Li Hao managed a slight smile and said, I'm sorry, uncle, I was planning to take revenge after the guests had left, so as not to disgrace the Li family, but it seems I've brought shame upon us anyway. Their father-son conflict had affected Qizhou City and would surely spread far and wide. Hearing Li Hao's words, Li Muxiu's heart trembled violently. Although he didn't know what had happened, was he not clear about Li Hao's character? Years of companionship, countless conversations by the lake, how could he fail to understand a child? However, don't talk, your uncle will decide for you. Even if your grandfather were here today, I would still stand up for you. Li Muxiu stated, his voice almost a growl at Li Muxius' words. Li Tiangang's face changed, especially since the other party had mentioned his deceased father. Fury flickered in his eyes as he said, Uncle, these years Hao-er's temper has been spoiled by your indulgence, hasn't it? Li Muxiu gently put Li Hao down, looking at his body riddled with chain wounds, eyes filled with sorrow, yet he dared not relieve Li Hao of his chains for fear of exacerbating his injuries. He stood up, turned to face Li Tiangang, and angrily retorted, That's right. And what of it if I indulged him? Do you plan to punish me too? Li Tiangang's expression turned grim as he said darkly, Uncle. Although you're my uncle and I am grateful for your raising Hao-er, you're also responsible for his current state due to your indulgence. Grateful? Who needs your gratitude? Li Muxiu raged. While you and your wife were stationed at the frontier pass, if we didn't spoil Hao-er, who else would? Should we wait for you? Li Tiangang clenched his teeth and replied, Uncle, don't lose your temper, we can't have such reckless talk. My station at the frontier pass is by imperial command, for the sake of the people there. Should I neglect the common welfare of the world for the sake of one child? Li Muxius' expression shifted subtly. Coming from a family of military lineage, he couldn't deny this point. Perhaps ordinary people could care for their own families as well as for the greater good, but the divine general mansion could not. If that were the case, how would there still be countless families out there? Even though I don't know what happened, what grave mistake could Hao-er possibly make to warrant such cruelty from you? Li Muxiu could not help shouting in rage. Li Tiangang sneered, he just received the true dragon and already he has the audacity to think of killing his brother and father, relying on his talent without restraint. Has he ever thought that his talent comes from me? Even though he hasn't awakened the divine blood, which son of the Li family lacks talent? His unrivaled status among his peers is because he carries the blood of me and Qingqing. His reaching the 15 Li realm at 14 is thanks to the resources of the Li family. His ability to use these peerless techniques is because of the Li family's cultivation technique. Without the Li family, what does he have? Li Muxiu replied angrily, he is your son, isn't he supposed to benefit from these things? And besides, over the years, Hao-er hasn't really consumed much of the family resources. He has cultivated and achieved everything on his own. Chapter 153. Uncle, stop covering up for him. Li Tiangang said coldly, although you are my uncle, I am still the true dragon of the Li family. It's best you not interfere. Have you forgotten our ancestors' rules? Do you want me to shame our ancestors' honored souls by summoning them here over this? You've gone completely mad. Li Muxiu, enraged, raised his hand, intending to strike. Li Tiangang did not dodge, but simply looked at him coldly and said, Uncle, it's time to end this matter today. The crowd here has laughed enough. Do you want them to laugh even more? Now you're afraid of being a laughingstock. Li Muxius' face turned ashen. He could sense martial artists from all over the city were rushing over to witness this grand spectacle at the divine general mansion. Among them were several formidable and restrained presences that he recognized. All were famous individuals from years ago. This incident today would undoubtedly spread all over the world, completely disgracing the divine general mansion. You're absolutely disgraceful. Li Muxiu glared at him fiercely, then turned to look at the young man on the ground covered in blood. His eyes moistened as he crouched down to embrace Li Hao and with gritted teeth said, Li Tiangang, I entrusted you with the care of Hao-er before I left. How did you promise me, and is this how you've taken care of him? Li Tiangang's expression turned dark as he said, I gave him an opportunity, but he was far too presumptuous. Otherwise, I would not have taken such action. Li Muxiu was so furious that his body trembled, but he contained it. For at this point, treating Hao-er was the priority. Hao-er, hold on, uncle will surely seek justice for you. Having said this, he attempted to carry Li Hao away. Li Hao slowly shook his head, weakly saying, It doesn't matter anymore, uncle. The elderly man's body shook slightly, and then he heard Li Hao continue, From now on, I will no longer bear the Li name, nor will I use anything from the Li family. Everything I've eaten and drunk over the years, I will repay. But this life is my own. Tell him his son had died long ago, assassinated. As he said this, Li Hao's chest surged with blood, and he coughed up a large mouthful of fresh blood. The piercing pain of the 2 dragon spikes and the weight of the chains, combined with the tugging, felt like his spine was being stripped away, causing Li Hao to instantly clench his teeth in agony. Upon hearing this, Li Muxius' heart trembled, and his eyes grew sour and red. Hao-er, how could you say such things? Uncle arrived too late. I will take you for healing right away. No, Li Hao's ordinarily weak eyes suddenly burst with light as he gritted his teeth and said, "Uncle, just help me pull these things out. I can walk on my own." His words were not entirely bravado, with the recovery properties of the chess manuals keep a low profile. He could regenerate even from a severed limb, it would just take some time. This was equivalent to the special ability of the immortal's first level. Li Muxius' gaze fell on the two dragon fangs piercing his body. His eyes shaking with fury, he raised his hand and released a power to steady the fangs, preventing them from swaying and tearing the wound further. Then he turned and glared fiercely at Li Tiangang, said nothing, and rushed back towards the Divine General Mansion at high speed. He couldn't pull out the Dragon Fang's spike on the spot. Fearing Li Hao couldn't withstand it, "Uncle," Li Hao called out urgently. But as his emotions surged, his blood flow reversed, and he blacked out, fainting. "Tiangang, you're truly disappointing." After Li Muxiu left with Li Hao, Li Qingzheng gave a deep look at Li Tiangang and followed after them. Flicking his sleeve, others watched from a distance with complex expressions. They wanted to intervene, but Li Tiangang was clearly truly furious. Even his fifth uncle couldn't persuade him, so they were even less able to intervene. Moreover, Li Hao had dared to confront Li Tiangang so fiercely. They didn't know who to advise. If they advised Li Tiangang, it would imply Li Hao's earlier actions were justified, which would breach propriety. The best outcome would be for Li Tiangang to capture Li Hao and then slowly persuade and guide him. Who would have expected this father and son's battle to escalate to such a cataclysmic level? Li Tiangang's strikes were so severe, and Li Hao was so stubborn. "Li Xuanli, you've acted recklessly this time." Li Xuanli approached with a complex look in his eyes and said, "No matter what, Hao Heir is still a child. Moreover, he is intelligent, although my contact with him is limited. I can see that Hao Heir is quite measured in his dealings with others. This matter requires thorough investigation." Li Tiangang wanted to speak, but suddenly his complexion changed, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He quickly covered his chest as his robust and imposing body seemed about to fall. Li Xuanli was shocked and hurried to support him. Only then did he remember that the other party must have sustained serious injuries from suppressing his oath, but he had not expected that the battle with Li Hao would push him to this extent. Quickly, though, Li Xuanli thought of something and let out a smile, saying, "Tiangang, did Hao Heir just enter the Grandmaster realm?" Li Tiangang's eyes narrowed slightly as he nodded and said, "Yes, haha. I'm impressed." Li Xuanli couldn't help but laugh loudly. "A 14-year-old Grandmaster? Isn't that incredible? Our Li family has never seen such a talented monster before." Li Tiangang fell silent, shook his head slightly and said, "Let's talk about it when we get back. No matter how high the talent, one must follow the righteous path." Li Xuanli quickly said, "You talk to the child well when you get back." This matter, he lowered his voice, transmitting it. There might indeed be more to this. Li Tiangang's eyes turned cold as he said, "Compared to his actions today, that is no longer important." Li Xuanli was taken aback, gazing at his resolute and icy expression, and suddenly he felt that his younger brother, who campaigned in northern Yen for over a decade, had become somewhat a stranger to him. Chapter 154. In the Divine General Mansion, everyone had already returned in the mountain and river courtyard's inner chamber. As the crowd looked at the blood-stained youth on the bed, their attention quickly turned to the divine healer attending to Li Hao's injuries. He Jianlan asked with concern, "How is he? Why hasn't Hao Heir woken up yet?" The divine healer furrowed his brows, his complexion a mix of shock and doubt, and said, "Strange, very strange. What's strange?" Li Muxiu, pacing back and forth, demanded angrily. The divine healer hesitated, then said, "Young Master Hao's body seems unable to absorb these medicines. It's like the meridians are blocked, the healing herbs all ineffective." Li Muxius' face changed dramatically, and he quickly rushed to the bedside, seeing the precious medicines on Li Hao's wounds indeed flowing out with the blood, without being absorbed. He couldn't help but turn pale and exclaim, How can this be?" The divine healer had never seen such a bizarre phenomenon and was at a loss for words. "Then Hao Heir's injury," Li Muxiu said through gritted teeth. "Were they just supposed to wait for death?" The divine healer quickly said, "Don't panic. Although young Master Hao's body can't absorb the precious medicines, the strange thing is, his body is actually healing slowly on its own. As if it is," he hesitated, then announced astonishingly, "as if it's of the immortal realm within the three immortals." The divine healer had previously treated those in the three immortal states, And this phenomenon was extremely similar to what he had observed. At these words, everyone in the room was startled. Their expressions filled with shock similar to the immortal state of the three immortals? Could it be that this battle led Li Hao to step into the three immortals? How could that be? Upon hearing this, even Li Tiangang, who was sitting in another place and covered in healing ointments, couldn't help but look startled. Li Hao's advancement to the heavenly human realm had already surprised him enough. But to leap to the immortal state from the 15 Li realm in one step? Not even the reincarnation of a sage could do such a thing. Within the crowd, Lu Yurong's complexion also underwent a drastic change. Appearing somewhat dazed, Li Tiangang, Li Muxiu, however, suddenly turned around, stormed over to Li Tiangang, and said through clenched teeth, "You see, look at the mess you've made. Hao Er has a unique physique and cannot absorb medicines. You said he relied on the Li family's medicines to achieve today's accomplishments? You don't understand your son at all." Li Tiangang was slightly lost for words, as indeed, he had not anticipated such a situation. Him and his wife's union had also been an extremely rare occurrence. In other words, a physique like Li Hao's had almost never existed before, and even if it had, they had not paid it any attention. As the others heard Li Muxius' words, their expressions shifted slightly. Staring at the blood-stained youth on the bed, they fell into silence. To be able to cultivate to such an extent without any medicinal assistance was simply unheard of, beyond belief. Even though they were accustomed to geniuses and prodigies, they had never seen such an exaggerated case. Standing outside the room, figures like Li Mingguang, Li Wushuang, and Li Qianfeng, who were in the courtyard, changed their expressions and showed shock upon hearing the conversation indoors. As scions of the Li family, they were well experienced, and no genius was unknown to them, but compared to the gravely injured youth on the bed at that moment, everything seemed insignificantly. Qianfeng's complexion turned pale, and his fingers in his sleeves involuntarily clenched tightly. Brother Hao in the room. Bian Rushue stood by the foot of the bed, her eyes filled with both shock and concern. "So what should we do now?" Li Muxiu looked at the divine healer, asking urgently. The divine healer looked at the youth, his face showing compassion as he said, "If young Master Hao can't use medicines, we can only let him heal on his own, but right now he's been pierced by a dragon fang. His body constantly under attack, which greatly diminishes the self-healing effect." Li Muxiu clenched his fists with a cracking sound, containing his rage as he said, "Then we should first remove this dragon fang." Hearing this, Li Tiang's lips moved slightly as if he wanted to speak, but then he held back. "I will help," Li Qizheng immediately offered. The divine healer nodded, then instructed, "Please protect his heart meridian to avoid tearing it when we pull out the dragon fang." Under his direction, Li Qizheng cooperated with Li Muxiu, one protecting the heart meridian, the other removing the dragon fang. As the piercing chain was pulled out, the youth on the bed sprayed out blood, his face showing agony, but his brows were furrowed tight, as if trapped in a troubling nightmare. Without waking up, Li Muxius' eyes were moist as he watched the divine healer bandage Li Hao's wounds and wipe away the blood. He took a deep breath and said through clenched teeth, "Everyone out. Let Hao Er recuperate in peace. I want to see for myself just why everyone is treating Hao Er this way." As he spoke, he shot a deadly glare at Li Tiangang, then turned and left the room first. Seeing this, the rest sighed and followed him out. Li Qizheng, however, did not leave. He remained in the room to watch over Li Hao and also shot a glance at Lu Yurong, who was walking at the back, his eyes slightly dark. He witnessed the whole incident unfold, and now a suspicion lurked inside him. So, did Hao Er injure Che Feng to avenge the poisoning from years ago? In the Li family enforcement hall, a crowd had gathered. Li Muxiu sat upright, his face fierce, scanning over Lu Yurong. He suddenly recalled that when he first met Li Hao had also shown him a trace of wariness. His heart felt a sour pain, thinking that perhaps back then it was the memory of the poisoning that led Li Hao to be so guarded against others. "Uncle, there is no evidence for this. Don't talk nonsense." Lu Yurong quickly stood up and said, "Hao has been stubborn and reckless in making friends these years. Who knows what nonsense he might have heard from some servants, or perhaps someone instigated him, wanting to see our divine general mansion's shame." "Shut your mouth." Li Muxiu shouted angrily, "A venomous woman. Do I not know what kind of person Hao is? With Hao's temperament, if you had no grudge against him, would he even care about the position of the true dragon of the Li family?" Chapter 155. "So what if I willingly hand it all over to your son? Fame and glory? Titles and honors?" He couldn't help but laugh angrily. With Hao Er's talent, these things are but trifles that he can easily obtain. He stepped into the 15 Li realm at the age of 13. "What?" Hearing the words spilled by Li Muxiu, everyone was shocked and pale, entered the 15 Li realm at 13. Li Muxiu looked at the stunned beautiful young woman and sneered, "Tell me, for a kid who stepped into the 15 Li realm at 13, if he wanted fame and glory, who in this world wouldn't know his name?" The room fell into silence, everyone was mute. Given Li Muxiu's nature, his words were likely not false, and even if the boy had been 14, he would still have been enough to dazzle the world. It's just that the shocking change was too sudden. And they had not thought of this. Lu Yurong came back to her senses, her pale face forcibly composed, and said, "Uncle, even if Hao Er has an unparalleled talent, it doesn't mean he doesn't covet the true dragon's position. With the resources of the true dragon and the support of the Li family ancestors, he could reach even greater heights. Isn't that a huge attraction for a genius?" Li Muxiu scoffed, still arguing. "Do I not know what Hao Er is like? Titles and riches pass before one's eyes. He pays no heed to fame or disgrace. Remember, when he's not fishing with me, he's entertaining himself. Have any of you ever seen him cultivate?" Upon hearing this, Li Xuanli and Li Fenghua hadn't reacted yet, but all the ladies in the courtyard changed their expressions. Indeed, over the years, they never seemed to have seen that child cultivate. He spent his days indulging in eating, drinking, and merrymaking, even taking the time to play with the cooks in the kitchen, learning cooking, and wasting precious time. Is this the kind of person who would fabricate lies to kill Qianfeng and remove rivals for the sake of vying for the true dragon? Would he covet the benefits brought by the true dragon inheritance? Who would believe that? At this moment, no one harbored any doubts in their hearts anymore. Lu Yurong's body was slightly trembling as she said, "Uncle, you have been with Hao Er for a long time. You can't be partial. Hao Er might seem simple, but he's not simple at all. If what he said about remembering everything after the age of one is true, then how terrifying is this child? He's been pretending all these years, playing a role. He's been acting like a naive child, feigning innocence. With such cunning at such a young age, can you really trust him? Shut your mouth." Li Muxiu slammed the table and shouted angrily, "Even if Hao Er's been pretending, been in disguise, how precious is a genius time? No matter how demon-like you are, there are only so many hours in a day. Tell me, isn't the time he spent on pretending and playing the time he has genuinely lost? With that same time, if he had devoted himself to cultivation, not to speak of the 15 Li realm, even reaching the 3 immortals might not have been impossible. Then why should he care about your son, a being he could squash with a slap? Your son is worthy to compare himself to Hao Er, worthy to compete with him?" Upon hearing this, everyone involuntarily looked towards Lu Yurong. At this moment, what she said no longer had any effect on them. The previous shift was too abrupt, they had not had time to react, but now with a bit of reflection, they knew everything Li Muxiu said was true. The key point was that this was a fact. Li Hao had not been practicing cultivation. Even if he intentionally pretended to entertain others, the loss was simply too great. That time could have been spent on cultivation. So what fear of competition would there be? The point was, Li Hao's talent was indeed too outstanding, too demon-like. With such a prodigious talent, they really could not think of any other reason for him to frame Lu Yurong, to murder Li Qianfeng. Competition? As Li Muxiu said, although Li Qianfeng was also a dragon among men, personally taught by the Buddha, when compared to Li Hao he truly wasn't worthy. Chapter 156. Lu Yurong was at a loss for words. The monster-like talent of the child had shattered all her arguments. She knew that no matter what she said, it was futile, and her heart was filled with resentment. Hao Er possesses such a cultivation level. Isn't it because you, second uncle and fifth uncle, defied the heavens to change his fate? Lu Yurong spat out through clenched teeth. Li Muxiu was so angry he laughed and said, "My chance to defy the heavens and alter fate was used up long ago. Jianlan knows this. Yifang knows this too. As for fifth brother's chance, he's been keeping it and used as a last resort to reshape the fate of someone when the Li family descendants are no good for anything else. For Hao Er? Hao Er has no need for that chance." Everyone was staring at Lu Yurong. They knew that Li Muxiu, the second uncle, had a rather peculiar temperament, but he would not lie. Feeling the gaze of the whole room, Lu Yurong suddenly felt a bitter and ironic smile creep onto her face. Finally understanding the feeling Li Hao must have had when he was under the scrutiny of the crowd, perhaps only she could truly empathize with the child's feelings, that sense of despair. However, she wasn't about to admit defeat just yet and said, "Second uncle, after all is said and done, words alone aren't proof. Our Li family is an enormous clan. Even law enforcement must be based on evidence, right?" Li Muxiu replied in a cold voice, "The poison Hao Er mentioned is something I've heard of before. Once ingested, unless it's immediately checked on the spot, it's undetectable. That poison has been lost for many years. Back then, the 5 great divine general mansions joined forces to wipe it out, and many ancient noble clans were involved too. Not to mention the elixir formula, even the land where it was produced has been turned to ash. I never thought that this thing would still be preserved. The poison pill of God-destroying blood was dreaded even by the most ancient of clans, and the royal family was no exception. After all, only the descendants of families that could produce immortal beings might be secretly harmed by it. For other noble clans with no immortals, wanting to destroy their divine blood, they'd first need to possess that capability. How is clever? Over these years, he hasn't been able to find any evidence. And there's no evidence left behind by this thing unless you personally confess, or we take a trip to Mount Wuliang and have a rummage under the Buddha Lord's backside. When you dared to poison him back then, you must have anticipated the worst scenario, right? Li Muxiu asked with a cold chuckle. The worst scenario would be exposure, but even exposure would leave no evidence. Liu Rong's heart trembled when he struck at the truth, but her expression remained unchanged as she said, "Second uncle, you may hold a high position and wield great power, but you still can't dismiss the need for evidence. I've never heard of the things you're talking about. Then tell me, why would Hao accuse you unjustly rather than someone else? You'll have to ask Hao that. I can't understand where I could have possibly offended him." Good. Very good. Li Muxiu was amused by his own anger, but since the other party vehemently denied everything, he had no evidence in hand, unless, of course, they went to Mount Wuliang. The only way she could have obtained that thing was from there. And only that Buddha Lord could have kept it concealed for so many years without anyone finding out. They say the Buddha mercifully liberates all sentient beings. What a joke. Does he bring calamity only to swoop in and play the savior afterward? Li Muxiu scoffed, daring to covet the selection of the Li family true dragon. From today onwards, your son Li Chiefeng will either move to Mount Wuliang and never set foot in this house again, or stay here and never return to Mount Wuliang. Choose one of the two. Liu Rong's face changed abruptly, and she said, "Uncle, you can't make such decisions without any basis, not to mention that you're not the true dragon of the Li family, although you are of a higher generation. Do you really intend to oppress us orphans and widows with your seniority? How can you let Feng Ping rest in peace in heaven?" Silence. Li Muxiu roared with anger. "When Feng Ping sought your Lu family for marriage, I was already against it. Your Lu family has been civil officials for years, with all your cunning tricks, which I have long found displeasing." Younger brother, from the side, Chen Hafang's face showed a slight change as he said, "Today we talk only of family matters. Let's not involve too much." The rage on Li Muxiu's face flickered, but he restrained himself. Indeed, if he were to voice these opinions elsewhere, he would offend both Mount Wuliang and the court officials. Thus, he would only express them within his own clan. He had to get it off his chest. However, given his standing, to some extent, it didn't matter what he said as long as it wasn't widely publicized. Even if you deny it outright, it's futile. I will get to the bottom of how heirs matter until it's clear. Your son better not even think about leaving for cultivation." Li Muxiu said angrily, pressing Liu Rong. Liu Rong's voice trembled. "Uncle, are you bullying us orphans and widows? If you can't find out for a lifetime, are you going to forbid Chiefeng from leaving for cultivation forever?" Li Muxiu snorted coldly. "If you're afraid, then confess yourself and save everyone's time. How can I admit to something I haven't done?" said Liu Rong in sorrow. Seeing this, Li Muxiu couldn't be bothered to waste more words with her. He glared at Li Tiangang, who sat silently beside him, and said, "And you, Tiangang, as Hao Er's father, you have neglected him since he was a child. Has Hao Er ever held a grudge against you? Your toils on the frontier pass are hard-earned, and everyone knows it. But when such a big incident occurs, you stand against Hao Er. What kind of father are you?" At that moment, Li Tiangang was as silent as a stone, and after a pause, he said, "Uncle, Hao Er is willful. I punished him not because I completely distrust him, but because he is too disrespectful to his elders." Saying this, he looked up at Li Muxiu. "If he had spoken to me properly, I would have sought justice for him, but he resorted to lethal measures. Do you think that's right?" Li Muxiu was furious. "With your attitude and temperament, do you think Hao Er can't see through it? Talking to you, there's no point whatsoever. You say you will seek justice for him, so how will you do it? Now show me how you'd seek justice." Although Li Tiangang could detect the sarcasm in his words, he still responded solemnly, "It is naturally to conduct a thorough investigation. If my sister-in-law is indeed guilty, she should be dealt with according to her crimes and confined by the family laws." Li Muxiu scoffed. "That cunning woman is a titled lady of the state, equal in rank to Jian Lan. How many years and months will it take if you follow the due process to investigate? Even if she were to reveal the truth and confess in the end, are you unaware of the penalty that would follow? At most, she'd lose her title as Lady of the State and be demoted to a commoner. Considering the merits of the Li family and Feng Ping's contributions, a severe sentence is impossible. As a result, although she may have been punished, she would still live a life of luxury in the divine general mansion. How could Hauer possibly swallow such an injustice? So, is he supposed to break the law and commit murder? Li Tiangang sharply looked at Li Muxiu. So am I to just watch idly as they, the mother and son, are murdered, doing nothing? You. Li Muxiu said angrily, you lead troops in battle with such intelligence, so how come you're so foolish about this? Whether it's punishment or execution, all you had to do was let Hauer have his way. Was that so hard? That unfilial son dared to kill even me with such a terrible temper. I can't indulge him. Li Tiangang snorted coldly. Uncle, I will investigate Hauer's matter thoroughly, and I will give everyone an explanation. Our Li family will never forgive any criminal, nor will we condone anyone. Although he didn't state it explicitly, his words already hinted at the presence of the true dragon leading the family, indicating that he was the ruler of this generation. Even though Li Muxiu and Li Qinzheng had higher status within the family, seniority at most commanded respect, but it could not overstep the family head. It's like the emperor's uncle being the imperial uncle. But do you think you can direct the emperor? That, unfortunately, would be a mistake. Li Muxiu's face turned ugly with Li Tiangang assuming this identity. He could not contradict him. Otherwise, if the elders had the final say, the so-called family head would be nothing but a joke, after all. If one could take control simply by surviving to be the oldest, it would lead to a vicious cycle. Everyone would fear death and nobody would want to lead the charge. What then becomes of the noble clan's legacy? If your father was still around, he would be disappointed in you too. Li Muxiu said no more, leaving with a flick of his sleeve. Even he had no way to deal with Lu Yurong. The divine general mansion had to abide by the law too. She had the protection of an imperial order, and going through the legal procedures of the imperial court took too much time. As for imposing a strict family punishment, it was possible, but it required Li Tiangang's approval. Now, with his refusal, everything was in vain. Yurong, you should tell the truth about what happened. If you do, Xie Feng will still have a place in the mansion. After Li Muxiu left, Chen Hufang looked at Lu Yurong with a very serious expression. Lu Yurong said bitterly, Mother, do you not believe me either? Chen Hufang stared at her. After a long moment, she sighed deeply. News of the great battle between the Li family father and son quickly spread throughout Qingzhou. The battle affected the city, seen by many eyewitnesses, and it was impossible to cover up the news. Taverns and tea houses were filled with endless discussions, especially since the true dragon's decision was witnessed by many guests, leading to various pieces of news leaking out. Some of these rumors were true, some false, and some utterly ridiculous. Some said that Li Hao had taken down the true dragon, wanting to kill his brother and father to unify the Li family. Others said that the Li family's young man had drunk too much wine at the table and spoke nonsense, which led to conflict. There were also claims that he bore a grudge against his father for guarding the frontier pass and not returning home for over a decade, resulting in his angry sword drawing. There were even rumors that Li Tiangang had sired an illegitimate child during his 14 years in northern Yan, secretly bringing him back, and this led to the explosive father-son battle when his own son found out. In any case, all the versions seemed to have some basis, making them believable, and the more they were passed on, the more incredible they became. But no matter which version, such an earth-shattering battle, especially between father and son, left everyone guessing what punishment Li Hao would ultimately receive. Some elders expressed that, even if his father had brought back an illegitimate child, he should not have drawn his sword against his own father. It went against ethics and was exceedingly unfilial. Others said that the child was still young, and everything could be forgiven. Time hurried by, and 2 days later, among the bubbling speculation that filled the city, countless gazes turned towards the divine general mansion, whose high walls seemed to isolate everything, forbidding any peeping. For 2 days, there was no movement inside the mansion walls, as silent as death. Then a message spread, claiming that the divine general was punishing his own son severely. At Tan Palace Academy, by the cold pond, Song Yufeng arrived in a white robe, floating over like a Taoist priest. Looking at the woman standing by the cold pond, he gave a wry smile and approached her. You've heard about it? It's not about hearing. Song Qiumo replied coldly. This city is only as big as a palm, and that day I saw it with my own eyes. That demon-slaying hand was truly ruthless against his own son. Song Yufeng was at a loss for words, indeed. For those in the Four Stands realm, Qingzhou City was clear at a glance, and on that day, he too had witnessed it with his own eyes. Sighing, Song Yufeng said, for a child blessed by heaven like a Qilin, even if he makes mistakes, he doesn't deserve this. I wonder what the divine general has been through at the frontier pass to be so hot-tempered. I don't care what he's been through. I just want him to come out alive, Song Choma said coldly. The two he's. She referred to were not the same person. Song Yufeng gave a wry smile and replied, tigers may be vicious, but even they don't eat their cubs. You're worrying too much, humph. Hard to say. Song Choma glanced at him and said, you didn't come here just to stop me, did you? Not at all, Song Yufeng replied helplessly. He is, after all, a mentor under my name in Tan Palace. I'd like to visit him and take the chance to persuade him to come back to his lessons. That makes sense, doesn't it? Song Choma gave him a look, but her expression softened a bit. Since that's the case, let's not wait any longer and make our way there soon. Going there is no problem, but you must assure me we're only there to persuade. We can't take any action. This is, after all, someone's family affair, Song Yufeng quickly added. Saying all this, you still don't trust me, do you? If you talk like that, you're being too distant. Since he's your mentor, why didn't you go before? Haven't I said it already? I'm only good for delivering charcoal in snowy weather, and I don't like adding flowers on the brocade. Chapter 157. Within the divine general mansion, in the mountain and river courtyard, in a luxurious and noble room, a youth slowly awakened on the soft bed. Li Hao had a dream in which his body seemed weightless, soaring through the heavens and earth. He flew over grasslands, rivers, and lakes, shoulder to shoulder with the birds drifting through the mountains and great earth. Streams converged, gradually forming into an ancient character. That character was his name. Then Li Hao woke up, and as soon as he opened his eyes, he saw a concerned and aged face before him. How air? Li Muxiu exclaimed joyfully, quickly asking, you're finally awake. How do you feel? Is your body better? Over the past few days, the maidservant Qing Shi attending to Li Hao had cleaned and wiped his body, removing all the bloodstains and changing him into clean clothes. The torn flesh and even the broken ribs were gradually healing under the intermittent examination of Li Muxiu and the divine physician. Such serious injuries healing on their own truly revealed an ability of the undying realm, which belonged to the three immortals, yet Li Hao, having not achieved the status of the three immortals, possessed this unique physique which could be described as miraculous. This place as Li Hao's bewildered gaze gradually sharpened, and very soon his expression changed as he recognized this as his own room. Does this mean he is still in the divine general mansion? He swiftly tried to get out of bed, but the moment he moved, a sharp pain shot through his chest where his ribs hadn't fully healed yet, and the wounds slightly cracked open again, oozing fresh blood. The pristine white clothes he had donned were stained red in an instant. However, you should rest first, Li Muxiu quickly suggested, but Li Hao had already sat up. Taking a few short breaths, he looked at his anxious second uncle, then scanned the room. Besides his second uncle, there was Qing Ji, but no one else. Noticing Li Hao's glance, Li Muxiu said, your fifth uncle is still watching over the ancestral hall, but he can sense what is happening here. A faint smile appeared on Li Hao's face as he nodded. Then his divine soul burst forth from his body and wandered through the mountain and river courtyard. There he saw Li Yuanzhao with a nervous and anxious expression, as well as Bian Ruxue outside in the courtyard. He also saw Li Wushuang pacing back and forth, accompanied by his sister Li Jining. In a corner, Li Hao finally saw the figure of the little white fox. It was hiding among the flowers and plants, its injuries appearing to have healed. Li Hao breathed a sigh of relief, withdrew his divine soul back to his body, and smiled. Thank you, uncle, for saving my life. Li Muxiu slightly changed color and said in a low voice, however, your father never intended to kill you. He was just momentarily insane. You are father and son. He suddenly found himself unable to continue. He had wanted to say you should understand him. After all, Li Muxiu wished for the father and son to be at peace, but facing a child pale as snow, severely wounded, he felt it was cruel to ask him to understand such a stubborn father. However, Li Hao had already captured the meaning. Behind his uncle's words, he smiled and said to Qing Shi beside him, bring me my outerwear. Seeing Li Hao awake, a look of joy spread across Qing Shi's face, washing away the haggardness. She quickly nodded. However, what are you planning to do? You haven't fully recovered. You should rest, Li Muxiu urged him. Li Hao shook his head slightly and suddenly thought of something, asking, Uncle, do you know about my mother, that she came from the great wilderness heaven? Li Muxiu was taken aback and asked, who told you this, Tianyang? Hearing that name, Li Hao instinctively frowned and shook his head. Uncle, please tell me about it. Thinking Li Hao knew everything already, Li Muxiu sighed. Your mother has a complicated identity. Indeed, she came from the great wilderness heaven, and it was due to an accident that she met your father. At that time, no one approved of their marriage. But ultimately, no one wanted to break apart the ill-fated couple. Li Hao's lips twitched slightly, but he said nothing. You're not planning to go find her, are you? Li Muxiu suddenly asked. Li Hao was startled and said, isn't my mother dead? Li Muxiu was also stunned, realizing he had misspoken and fell silent. Seeing his face change, Li Hao pressed on, Uncle, you know something, don't you? Tell me. Li Muxiu looked into his eyes, pondered for a moment, and then sighed. You do have a right to know. Your father didn't tell you, and he was right not to, because she went back to the great wilderness heaven. It's nearly impossible for her to come out again, especially since she bore a child. A jolt went through Li Hao's heart. His mother wasn't dead? Even though your mother isn't dead, it's very unlikely that you will see her again. Child, don't think about going to find her. The great wilderness heaven is boundless and vast. Even those in the Four Stands realm face extreme dangers there. Li Muxiu said to Li Hao, with your current cultivation level, entering the great wilderness heaven would mean certain death. Even if you went, you might not be able to find her. I don't even know where her clan's tribe is located. Li Hao stood there in a daze but soon came back to reality. He smiled and nodded. Uncle, don't worry, I won't take any risks. Even if I were to go, it would be when I have the power to roam the great wasteland heavenly realm freely. He wasn't merely appeasing his uncle, he meant what he said. If he had been eager to take the risk when he first met Li Tiangang, his priority now was simply to live his life well. After all, he had not seen her for over a decade. There was no rush. Relieved by Li Hao's response, Li Muxiu said, it's good you think this way. Li Hao softly smiled, and as Qingxi handed over his clothes, he silently put them on. Once he was ready, he took a deep breath and looked at his uncle. He said in a soft voice, Uncle, the road of Jianghu is long, and after today I won't be able to join you for fishing anymore. Li Muxiu's pupils contracted sharply, and his tone changed as he asked, Hao heir, what are you planning to do? Li Hao's gaze drifted to the courtyard as he said, I won't stay here any longer. Young master. Qingxi couldn't help but exclaim in disbelief. Li Hao walked slowly out of the room and into the courtyard. Seeing Li Hao fully recovered, Li Yuanzhao and Bian Ruxue, who were waiting in the courtyard, immediately sensed it and rushed over in surprise and delight. Brother Hao. Li Yuanzhao quickly called out. Bian Ruxue also wore a face of joy. Have you recovered? Seeing the two of them, a smile appeared on Li Hao's face, and he said to Li Yuanzhao, from now on, you must cultivate well on your own. Li Yuanzhao was taken aback and said, Brother, how are you? Li Hao's gaze slowly swept over the courtyard he had spent 14 years in. He was familiar with the flowers, plants, and trees inside. In many areas, he had even drawn sketches of them, but now none of that mattered anymore. At this moment, the sky was already chilly. The fallen leaves of deep autumn had long since withered, and the yellowed ground had been swept clean by the house servants, giving off a desolate chill as if frost had descended. Without speaking, Li Hao walked slowly to a spot in the courtyard. A few people hurriedly followed him, with Li Yuanzhao anxiously inquiring along the way. In the end, Li Hao came to a circle of flowers and plants, surrounded by stones to forbid entry. He fell silent. Then slowly and deeply bowed. Uncle Lin, farewell, take care, he said. After speaking, Li Hao took one long look, then turned around, his thoughts flying out to caress the small white fox in the courtyard. The small white fox, sensing Li Hao's presence, immediately felt overjoyed, and like a swift white shadow, it rushed over and ran to Li Hao's feet. A smile appeared on Li Hao's face, and then he turned to Second Master, saying seriously, Second Master, thank you for your care over the years. If there is a chance in the future, Hao heir will repay you. As he spoke, he too bowed deeply and earnestly. Li Muxiu's face changed dramatically, and he said, How you? Li Yuanzhao said urgently, Brother Hao, are you leaving? Li Hao looked at him, smiled, patted his shoulder, and said, Brother Hao is leaving. Brother Hao? Bian Ruxue was also somewhat urgent but didn't know what to say. Where are you going if you leave? An icy voice filled with anger suddenly came from behind. The smile on Li Hao's face gradually faded, but he did not turn around. The small white fox, as if shocked, shuddered but then bared its teeth slightly and positioned itself protectively behind Li Hao. Facing Li Tiangang. Li Muxiu saw Li Tiangang approaching, with Yu Xian, Li Fu, and Zhao by his side. Anger rose on his face. What tone is that? Can't you speak properly to Hao? Li Tiangang's expression was dark. He too had been healing from injuries for the past 2 days and had recovered quite a bit, with other brothers and sisters advising him. Along with the 5th and 8th, he had been considering easing the father-son relationship. But seeing that Li Hao had just awakened, and the first thing he did was not see him, but rather wander around the courtyard preparing to leave, anger surged in his heart once again. Just got a bit better, and the wings are hardened. Again, huh? Li Tiangang said coldly. The corners of Li Hao's mouth lifted slightly and he turned around, silently looking at the man in front of him. So, do you want to fight again? As he spoke, the aura around his body was already revealed. Fine, fine, fine. Li Tiangang saw this demeanor and was so angry that blood surged to his face, but this time he managed to restrain himself. After all, he had just injured himself by violating a heartfelt oath. And to fight and add injury to injury was something he hadn't experienced many times in his 14 years in Northern Yen. Great, just stepped into the heavenly human realm and you can't be disciplined already. Li Tiangang's gaze was piercing and cold as he spoke. Li Hao looked at him indifferently, feeling not the slightest ripple in his heart, and said, "From now on, you have no right to talk to me about discipline again, and I am no longer your son. I've said before. Your son was assassinated long ago." "What do you mean?" Li Tiangang asked coldly. Li Hao looked at him quietly and said softly, "Have you forgotten? Well, let me remind you then. You still remember the reason Fu returned, don't you?" At these words, everyone was slightly startled. Li Fu's return was naturally because of Li Hao's encounter with an assassin at the age of 8 when a member of the human race from the Zhou Tian realm, enslaved by the demon race, snuck into the mansion to assassinate him. Your son should have died at the age of 6 because you were guarding the frontier pass. Li Hao said flatly, "Did you think you had the protection of a powerful figure? That assassin was killed by my own hands. Before he died, he said that I was your weakest point, trying to assassinate me to shake your state of mind. Now it seems that the demon race thought too highly of me." At these words, everyone was stunned, their pupils contracted, and they looked at Li Hao in shock. Chapter 158. There was a mistake in the previous text about the age being 8. It's 6, my senile mistake. The correction has been made, please forgive me. Li Tiangang and the others had thought that when Li Hao survived an assassination attempt, it was because Li Muxiu and other elders were secretly protecting him. Who would have guessed that it was Li Hao himself who had resolved the crisis? But at the age of 6? Ordinary children just start their cultivation at 6, and yet Li Hao was able to kill a Zhou Tian realm assassin with ease? You must understand, assassins strike stealthily and suddenly even those of the same realm might be killed. This indicates that the 6-year-old Li Hao already possessed sufficient strength to counter the Zhou Tian realm. But 6 years old? They all stared at Li Hao in a daze, somewhat spellbound. Their estimation of the child's cultivation talent repeatedly exceeded, but apparently they had still grossly underestimated him. His monstrosity was such that even the saint heir of the Gan Tao Palace would likely feel inferior. Li Tiangang fell silent for a moment. Although he didn't like Li Hao's personality, he had to admit that the child's talent was top-notch. Li Fu suddenly thought of something and said to Li Hao, "Young Master Hao, when you went to Songyu City on a mission and I clandestinely protected you, those 2 great demon Jiao dragons on the road, I killed them." Li Hao said calmly. Li Fu's pupils shrank, and he was shocked. During the time he had returned, he had gone to the Piaoxua courtyard to especially thank Gao Qingqing. Her puzzled expression at the time had surprised him, but now he realized the problem lay here. He was supposed to protect Li Hao, but it turned out that Li Hao had protected him instead. Li Fu felt a wave of sighs and shame in his heart. He should have realized it earlier. Li Hao had revealed 15 Li realm cultivation in Songyu City and slain demons alone. There was no need for anyone else to take action against those 2 great demons. There was also this matter? Li Tiangang frowned and looked at Li Fu. Li Fu hurriedly recounted the whole story to him, and Li Tiangang's eyes flashed with a cold light. That group of demons struggling in their death throes, the Saint Palace was already planning to retreat by then. Yet they still fancifully attempted one last struggle, simply ludicrous. So how had gone to slay great demons at that time? Li Yuanzhao also recalled the incident at the tea stall and couldn't help but freeze. At that time, they were leisurely drinking tea and enjoying snacks while Li Hao went off in an instant to slay 2 great Jiao dragons without making a sound. Yao's eyes were complex as he said, "So it seems if it weren't for the young master's tough luck and strong strength, these 2 attempts at assassination, he would have been dead." Upon hearing Zhao's words, Li Fu's complexion turned ashen and Li Tiangang's eyes condensed, his expression somewhat ugly. Originally, sending the divine travel realm's fierce warrior Li Fu back should have been enough to shelter him under normal circumstances. Who would have expected that the demon clan would be so insanely heartless? They targeted a 6-year-old child for assassination with the Zhou Tian realm instead of the Power Passage realm, leaving no chance at all, and now again sending 2 great Jiao dragons to assassinate him, meticulous to almost certain success, yet It was resolved by Li Hao himself. Li Tiangang took a deep breath and said to Li Hao, "Indeed, I have been negligent in your protection. I didn't anticipate that the demon clan would be so heartless. I thought you were safe within the divine general mansion with trusted aides on guard and other madams looking after you, and with the mansion's array, demons shouldn't have been able to get close. I didn't expect it to almost cost you your life." Li Hao's expression was calm as he said, "It wasn't almost, it was certain death." Upon hearing this, Li Tiangang's eyebrows shot up. He said indignantly, "Are you blaming me? What do you mean by certain death when you didn't die?" "Nonsense." Li Muxiu couldn't help but scold. "What are you saying, cursing Hao to die?" Although Li Hao's state of mind had already calmed, upon hearing these words, he couldn't help but look up at him. When he saw that face full of anger, he felt a sense of weariness and said indifferently, "My survival has nothing to do with you. My life was spared because of my own fate, my own strength. If it hadn't been for his transmigration, if it wasn't for the bonus of his panel, Li Hao knew he would have been doomed. Although due to the panel's issue he could not cultivate normally, his improvement in realm was not lacking in the least. After all these years, he had been earnestly farming experience, leveling up his panel, seemingly in enjoyment, but the more he played, the faster he advanced. If one were to consider the common circumstances of the Li family's descendants, even the least talented direct line could rely on resources to reach a 7th grade war body, and with unmatched talent, like 9th Uncle Li Junyi, he would be the best of a millennium. But what of it? Even 9th Uncle, at 6 years old, had just begun his cultivation and could not have overcome the Zhou Tian realm. Faced with Li Muxiu's roaring, Li Tiangang slightly restrained his anger, his gaze turning icy as he said, "Do you think you're strong enough? Do you think it was you who resolved it? Ridiculous. You've kept your cultivation situation hidden, even from me. I don't know who taught you." At this point, although he didn't look at Li Muxiu's face turned red with anger. The insinuation behind that statement was clear. Was there any need to say it outright? But when Li Hao was 6, he didn't even know this kid. "You're so full of yourself, thinking you're smart, but you're really foolish. If you had revealed your talent earlier and not hidden it, I would have called Yu Xian back to protect you long ago." Li Tiangang said coldly, "With Yu Xian, a master of the Tianan sect, he would have been able to protect you whether you were 6 years old and faced with assassination or when you went to Songyu City on a mission. Moreover, if you had shown your talent, you wouldn't have gone to the Tan Palace. You would have already become a disciple of a renowned master, building up your connections, and obtained the status of a direct disciple of a major force. Look at you now, so willful and uncaring. I don't even know how you caught the Emperor's eye this time. If it weren't for Emperor Yu's personal decree during that day's contest of connections, you would have lost, making a complete fool of yourself." Chapter 159. As a peerless genius with the greatest natural talent, you don't have connections like Li Qianfeng. What will people think? Are you too arrogant? Too aloof? Li Hao's eyes narrowed slightly as he said coldly, "What others think has nothing to do with me. Besides, if I were to reveal my talents, do you think the demons would only send assassins from the Zhou Tian realm? If the demons knew Yu Xian was protecting me, wouldn't they send assassins from the immortal realm? If I displayed my talents, given the progress of my cultivation, even sending someone from the immortal realm wouldn't be considered excessive, would it?" Li Tiangang was momentarily stunned, his complexion slightly changed. Indeed, in terms of natural talent, it was truly so. With the madness of those demons, there's nothing they wouldn't do. Moreover, to deal with a 6-year-old useless child, they had already sent an assassin from the Zhou Tian realm. If they knew of Li Hao's exaggerated natural talent, I'm guessing the first assassination attempt would involve the heavenly human realm or even the immortal realm. If someone from the immortal realm took action, unless the older generation of the Li family secretly protected him, the assassination was almost guaranteed to succeed. In the competition of true dragons, connections are just an embellishment. What's there to care about? With Hao Er's talent, with just one call, which prestigious family wouldn't come to visit? Li Muxiu interjected. Moreover, Hao Er can receive favor from Emperor Yu. What need does he have for other connections? Why don't we see the child Qianfeng being favored by His Majesty? Li Tiangang glanced at him. Of course, he understood this reasoning, but he felt that Li Hao wasn't making good use of it, being too carefree. Having talent isn't something to squander. The matter of assassination, indeed you have your reasoning, but as a family of military generals, this is the fate every descendant of the Li family must face. Li Tiangang said sternly, "Not just you, every boy of the Li family has faced assassination attempts. Ask your second uncle. The demons see us as thorns in their sides. I've heard that some of our older generation's children died shortly after birth. And sometimes while playing in the streets, they're ambushed by demons blending into the crowd. Your survival to this day is already a stroke of luck." Li Hao's face was expressionless as he said, "Then being born into the Li family is truly my good fortune." As a son of the Li family, is this the extent of your awareness? Li Tiangang said coldly. Li Hao couldn't help wanting to laugh, but looking at the other's face, he really couldn't bring himself to smile. He said indifferently, "The reason I'm saying all this isn't for anything else, and don't misunderstand. I'm not trying to blame or complain, nor am I trying to share my grievances with you. I'm just saying, your son is indeed dead from now on. I will no longer be a member of the Li family. Please step aside and don't block my way." "What is your attitude?" Anger surged in Li Tiangang's eyes as he said furiously, "At such a young age, what have you learned other than running away from home?" "Running away from home?" Li Hao gave a snort of laughter. "This isn't my home. I'm just a tenant. I've been renting for 14 years. The cost of food, clothing, and everything else I've spent in these 14 years, I will repay you." Li Muxiu glared angrily at Li Tiangang, but at this moment he was too concerned to scold him. Looking at Li Hao with a pained expression, he said, "Hao, don't be rash. If you don't like staying in Mountain and River Courtyard, you can live with my grandfather at Listening Rain Tower from now on. There, no one will manage you, no one can. With my grandfather there, I won't let you be wronged again." Li Tiangang angrily said, "Listening Rain Tower is also part of the Li family's property, and the cultivation techniques inside were also collected by our ancestors. Isn't the skill he has learned due to them? Even without relying on elixirs, doesn't he owe it to the cultivation techniques?" "Li Tiangang," Li Muxiu roared furiously, "do you really want to drive Hao away? To his death?" Li Tiangang was stunned by the roar but did not back down, saying indignantly, "Second uncle, stop indulging him. Does he really think all his skills come from himself? The blood that flows in his veins is from me and Qingqing. Without the union of me and Qingqing, could he have such a demon-like talent that defies all norms? Without the cultivation techniques collected by the Li family, could he have his current abilities? If he didn't carry the surname Li, would Emperor you have cared, have favored a mere mortal like him?" He became louder and more angry as he spoke. "All the glory and brilliance he has is because he bears the surname Li. You're absolutely unreasonable." Li Muxiu was so angry he couldn't speak. He had never been defied like this by the young man before him. Over the years, Li Tiangang had killed numerous demons on the frontier and had grown from a young man into a middle-aged one. His temper seemed different than before. "Uncle!" Bian Rushue and Li Yuanzhao both had ugly expressions, looking at Li Tiangang with concern, but they were too intimidated by his immense authority and spirit to speak out. The godlike authority made them shiver-faced with the angry Li Tiangang. Li Hao's demeanor remained exceptionally calm, his eyes becoming exceptionally cold as he slowly said, "You're right, so as I said earlier, I will no longer carry the surname Li, nor will I be a member of the Li family. Today, you either step aside or kill me." "You think I wouldn't dare?" Li Tiangang said angrily. The aura around Li Hao revealed itself, and his eyes sharpened. "Then try." "Enough, Tiangang." Li Muxiu's face flushed with blood qi, his eyes radiating a terrifying light. "Don't force me to break my hard oath. Once I break it, I won't hesitate to cripple you today." Li Tiangang's expression changed slightly. He naturally couldn't resist Li Muxiu's strength, but he hadn't expected the latter to protect Li Hao to such an extent, which filled him with resentment. If it weren't for these elders with proper discipline, he was sure he could rectify all of Li Hao's bad habits. "Hao is like this today, all thanks to you," Li Tiangang said through clenched teeth. Chapter 160. Li Muxiu said angrily, Fine. Now you blame me too." Li Hao shook his head and replied, "Second uncle, don't say any more. There's no need to continue. I'm leaving, everyone. Farewell." As he spoke, he walked straight ahead. Li Tiangang's face changed slightly. Rage flashed in his eyes, and a powerful aura burst forth from his body. But Li Hao acted as if he didn't see it and just stepped past him. Li Tiangang raised his hand, but as he looked at the boy's calm and indifferent face, his heart inexplicably ached and he gritted his teeth. "You will regret this." Li Hao didn't speak, but the corners of his mouth quirked slightly. Regret? He would never, even in death. "Hao Li Muxiu's eyes were filled with intense anger and disappointment. He glanced at Li Tiangang and then hurried after Li Hao, blocking his path. Hao, don't be impulsive, your second uncle Second uncle, please let me go. Li Hao looked up and simply spoke calmly. As Li Muxiu looked into the boy's eyes, his heart fluttered. He had words on the tip of his tongue but suddenly couldn't bring himself to say them. Li Hao had already stepped past him. Outside the Divine General Mansion, besides the onlookers from Qingzhou City who had recently come to gaze from close by, the street outside the mansion was now crowded with an impressive array of figures, all exuding extraordinary auras. They wore different styles of clothing, apparently from various states, but in truth, they all shared one identity, that of disciples from the White Hall of Tan Palace Academy, those who could enter the top-tier White Hall of the premier academy in the 19 states. Although their talents were not as exceptional as those of direct disciples from the top noble families, they were still dragons and phoenixes among people, the finest of their generation. At this moment, they were not in their academy uniforms but were dressed in their original attire. We request to see young Master Li Hao. Having heard of young Master Li Hao's exceptional talent, we have come to visit. Please allow us to enter the mansion to meet him. The crowd outside the mansion kept speaking loudly. The father and son battle at the Divine General Mansion had shaken the whole city, and they were naturally aware of it. These past few days, with various rumors swirling, they heard that Li Hao was inside the mansion these days, being strictly disciplined by his father, and they all rushed over to plead on his behalf. Saying that they were visiting was actually a euphemism for coming over to offer comfort and plead for him. The gathering of so many talents outside the mansion attracted a large crowd of onlookers on the roadside. The clamor of discussions also alerted everyone in the various courtyards of the mansion. Sitting in the Green Lotus courtyard, Chan Hafeng got the news and walked out, leaning on her cane with the support of the housekeeper. When the old madam took action, the other madams in the mansion also hurried over upon hearing the news to see what was happening. As a result, both inside and outside the mansion were crowded with people. That's the young master from the Yu family of Qi State. That's the daughter of the Zhao family from Yuzhou. The Bai family from Qingzhou is also here. Isn't that General Zhou's son? Some people in the crowd recognized the identities of these prodigies, while the knowledgeable madams from inside the mansion could also discern their identities from their attire, the decorations on their sleeves, and the carved jade pendants at their waists. The families behind these prodigies might not be as illustrious as the Divine General Mansion, but most were also well-known and prominent families in the various states now. They had all actually come to seek Li Hao previously at Li Hao's competition for a true dragon. Not even this many people had shown up. These guys, they couldn't have heard some rumors and come to plead for Hao, could they? Gao Qingqing speculated doubtfully. Lu Yurong's eyes darkened. In the past 2 days, Li Tiangang had already submitted her review process, and she heard that to avoid a conflict of interests, the matter was specifically handed over to a vice minister from the Ministry of Punishment to personally lead an investigation, and was on his way here. The journey should have been completed by now, but out of deference to her status as a noble consort, the vice minister had not rushed on the road. After all, it concerned the matters of the Divine General Mansion. A hot potato, the vice minister probably has already received numerous letters from the Lu family's literati and was at his wit's end. Hao has actually made so many good friends. Why didn't they come over before? Could it be they didn't know each other before? Everyone was marveling, but the likelihood of that was extremely low. After all, Li Hao's talent had already shown through, making him well-known in Qingzhou. If they wanted to curry favor, they should have done so during the heat of the True Dragon Banquet, not now. After a fight between father and son, when Li Hao's reputation had suffered, facing a great deal of criticism. After all, a fight between son and father goes against the traditional values of respect and filial piety in both ancient and modern times, but these people had chosen to come at this very moment. Chen Hafeng, leaning on her cane, remained silent, but her eyes revealed a touch of sorrow. She realized that most of these young elites were probably the boy's true friends. Compared to those connections formed out of interest, this genuine feeling was truly precious. Just then, suddenly, 2 figures descended from the sky and landed directly at the entrance of the mansion. As they looked at the grand and imposing Divine General Mansion, both Song Yufeng and Song Qiuma slightly narrowed their eyes. Then, they saw the gathered disciples from Tan Palace Academy, and Song Qiuma glanced at Song Yufeng beside her. Song Yufeng gave a wry smile and said, "These guys really know how to cause me trouble, but fortunately they did not wear our Tan Palace's uniforms, which shows they have some sense." At this moment, all these talents were dressed in their personal clothes, some even deliberately displaying jade pendants that symbolized their family identities. This gesture reassured and amused him. Song Choma gave him a slight glare and then fixed her gaze on the mansion. A blue gleam flashed in her eyes. Within her sight, she could see the divine general mansion's high walls covered with the shining divine radiance talisman patterns. There were several types of these patterns, and one of them was targeted against demons. If she carelessly stepped foot on it, she would immediately trigger these talisman patterns and activate the divine general mansion's array. Madam Hefang, it's been many years since we last met, Song Yufeng said with a smile as he saw the old lady inside the mansion and greeted her.